You're listening to NFT 365, the first daily podcast on NFTs with your host, Fanzo.
What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of NFT 365. As we're approaching episode 100, and I feel like it's kind of wild to think that even though we're almost 100 straight days, we are still not 1/3 of the way there. But hey, that's part of this fun journey. And I just gotta give a shout out to the Discord. I know that a lot of you that listen are jumping in from listening to Discord, and for many people, I think it's the very first time that you've been in a Discord. And I love that our community is so welcoming, and we just created a memes channel over there on the Discord. And big shout out to Carter and Kevin and all of those that are diving headfirst into the meme corner. And I like to say, I have no ego. I don't mind getting roasted. I've gone through some comedy roasts before, and I have lots of, let's just say, quirks and little nuances that I'm sure people are going to be able to have some fun with over there in the Discord. So, and if you're not in the Discord and you want to make some memes and have some fun, tag me on the socials. That's always appreciated. iSocialFans, or you can check out our NFT 365 podcast on all of the socials as well. So we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook as well, and I just dropped a massive blog post, right? And the funny thing about it is I dropped a massive blog post that's a really long form content. And the irony is the long form content, and I believe long form content is not dead. I mean, most of these podcast episodes are pretty long in length, but the title of the long form blog post that we just put up on the podcast website is New to NFTs, What You Need to Know About Twitter in 2022. So the irony here is I wrote a long form blog post about the shortest form social media platform. And, it's, for me, Twitter has been, it's my first love for social media. It's actually, when I found Twitter, I remember it feeling like, oh, wait a second, like it's not just a closed off network like MySpace and, early days Facebook. And for me, Twitter, the reason I love Twitter is that I believe it's the only platform where you can discover people that don't know you, never heard of you, but you share a common purpose or passion, or you're having a conversation around the same topic. And I've been active on Twitter, every day or, for 10 plus years. And at one point when I started my Twitter journey, I actually created 8 Twitter accounts, then I created 10 Twitter accounts. And the funny part about it is iSocialFans, which became my brand, my company, was actually the 8th Twitter account that I had created when I joined, because I was like, hey, I have 8 things to talk about. I'm going to have a poker Twitter account, a technology Twitter account, a Pittsburgh Penguins Twitter account, a Jeep Twitter account, a poker Twitter account, because I'm multi-hyphenated. And I know for so many of us, we are well-rounded. But, those times have changed. I went from 10 back down, and currently I believe I'm technically managing 4 Twitter accounts right now. We have the podcast one, which I don't really count as one of them, and I have my iSocialFans brand, which is the one I use primarily every day, which kind of encompasses all things. It's the one that's verified that has 130,000 followers or so. And then I have Pittsburgh Fans, which actually was my very first Twitter account, and it's Pittsburgh_fans, because all of my Twitter accounts were something _fans, Fanz, because, my name's Fanzo, kind of made things a little bit easier in that realm. And so, I started out with all these accounts, and so I still have Pittsburgh Fans, which is the one I tweet out about, Pittsburgh sports. I figure most people don't want to hear all of my yinzer talk about Pittsburgh sports. And then I have a poker account that when I'm, playing poker, when I'm watching poker, I've tweeted out that account pretty regularly. Then I have another account, which I usually do for research and for some more anonymous type posting. And of course we have the NFT 365 podcast Twitter account here as well. But for me, I will say last year, or 2020, was one of the toughest years for so many of us. And for those that don't know, this part of my story is, since 2004, I graduated college in 2003, but since 2004, I've traveled for 35 plus weeks of every year. Every job I've ever had has been a massive amount of travel. I love travel. I miss it crazy right now. I miss travel like crazy. And for me, of course, the pandemic, I've worked from home majority of my career, especially, on my own, but even when I worked for the government and then I worked for the data center company, I also worked from home for a good portion of that. But I never really worked from home full time because I was always traveling every week. 3 weeks of the month, every month I was always on the road. And I love that. I know some people that sounds horrible, but I liked it too because I didn't have to go on the whole week. So I could be gone a couple days, come home and see my daughters. But I will say when the pandemic kind of, reared its head and I spoke at Warren Buffett's event, I was the keynote for his event on March 12th. And I flew home and then everything, of course, shut down from there forward. For me, I had a lot of things that I had to discover about myself. A lot of that time, alone in my house when I don't have my daughters, with the 50-50 custody that we have and not traveling. And I realized a lot of things about myself. And one of them was that I was not very good at, pampering or rewarding myself or taking care of myself because I kind of relied on my travels to do that, right? I have flown over 1 million miles on Delta, so I'm diamond on Delta. I get upgraded, to first class almost every time. I stayed over 1,200 nights at a Marriott, so Marriott always upgrades me to the suite. And I'm not saying any of that to flex. I'm just saying what I realized was nowhere in my life was I good at kind of taking care of myself or rewarding myself. I would just work hard, play hard, and then, kind of allow that pampering to exist in my travel life. But, I also realized, throughout that pandemic that, part of my neurodiversity, part of my ADHD is that I don't like forced conversations. I actually hate talking on the phone. I know which might surprise a lot of people. It doesn't surprise my mom. My mom wishes I called her more. Sorry, Mom. Actually, Mom's probably not listening, but I'm a mama's boy, so I have to say sorry, Mom. But yeah, I don't like talking on the phone. I don't like calling people more so than anything else. I actually hate calling people because I feel like I'm telling people I'm so important that you must stop what you're doing and pick up your phone. And to me, I know that's not the case, but it really bothers me. It's bothered me my entire life. And it wasn't until I realized that it had a lot to do with my neurodiversity. And, as that year was going on in 2020, I recognized that, I was creating content. I was doing a lot of virtual events. I think I did 75 virtual events that year. But what I realized was I was missing the participatory aspect of my career, which, when I'm on stage, I look at what my job is having one of the greatest jobs in the world because people are giving me the thing that in many cases they value the most and, money can't buy, and that's their time and their attention. And I treasure that on stage and I miss the stages ridiculously amount. But I also didn't recognize that if I'm not giving, if I'm not helping people, if I'm not providing value and realizing that I'm making a difference, it really is tough on my mental health. It's really a struggle. And I will tell you, I joined Clubhouse, which those that don't know what Clubhouse is a social audio app that rolled out in early 2020 as the pandemic kind of came on, and it kind of shot up. It became extremely popular. And I logged on it the first time when it was still in beta. I had a download test flight, and I got on, and it was a very bro, Silicon Valley. Why everyone over there is great and everyone else sucks. And I didn't even last a week. I uninstalled the app and I was like, yeah, screw this. I don't need this right now in my life. And then a good friend of mine, Lindsay, and a shout out to Lindsay, who is one of my, dearest friends. And I actually got to meet her a couple of weeks ago for the first time in person, but she's someone I've worked with for, I don't know, almost 10 years, 9 years. But she messaged me one day and was like, hey, you gotta get back on Clubhouse. There's some really great marketers on there, some great conversations. And I ended up jumping back on Clubhouse and I was like, oh, okay, I can start to see what this is about. And I had my aha moment on December 9th. December 9th, I was scrolling the feed and you can kind of see what the rooms are on the app. And I rolled past a room titled Jack of All Trades, Masters of None, Welcome. Jack of all trades, masters of none, welcome. And I put my hands in the air and I was like, these are my people. Like, holy crap, there's a room that's like literally like made for me. And I've always been a proud generalist. I've always been, when people like forced me to niche down, it was not something I niched down. And so I ended up going into this room and I realized I didn't recognize anyone that was on the stage. And there was a couple hundred people in the room. And I ended up staying in that room for about 3 hours. Ended up raising my hand, asking a question, which I'll get back to in a minute. And then they were like, oh, wow, we'd love for you to stay up on stage. And I ended up staying on stage. And I realized, after a couple hours in, that I was the only white male on that stage for the 2.5 hours. And it dawned on me that, as much as I'm active on social media, as much as I am, creating content, the people that were in this room are people that I hadn't connected with. And it had not to do with their race, but they were just people that I didn't connect with. But I also realized that it was this amazing group of humans that were my people that I would not have discovered unless I came in that room. And I remember waking up in the morning on December 10th, and I came downstairs in my house. I have wood floors, and I remember I kind of like slid across the wood floors, kind of like Tom Cruise in Risky Business. For the young millennials and Gen Z, you can just Google, Risky Business and Tom Cruise. But I like stopped and I was like, whoa, what is this feeling? And it was one of the first times in that entire year of that early pandemic that I felt like whole. I felt like I made an impact. I found my people. And I will tell you, that started this very crazy addiction to Clubhouse, where I started spending, 60 hours a day on that platform, or 60 hours a day, 60 hours a week on that platform. And that continued for about 8 months. And I love social audio. I think social audio, the beauty of it is that you can't mail it in. You can't outsource it. You can't have your assistant do it. Like, the people that are there are actually there listening, right? And like, I wish I could see everybody that's listening to this podcast, right? But that doesn't exist. And I really loved the fact that they weren't recorded rooms, and we were having amazing conversations on mental health and being a multi-hyphenate and ADHD, and then about public speaking and virtual events and storytelling. And, I ended up doing a room with a good friend, Andy Henriquez, for over a year, every single Friday. We did it for a complete year. I ended up launching my another personal branding room every Tuesday with my good friend Scott. We did that for about 6 months. I created a club over there that fast became one of the largest clubs. It was called the Misfit Mafia, and it was one of the largest clubs talking all things storytelling and entrepreneurship. And then I teamed up with an amazing mental health leader, Nidhi Tiwari, and we did these rooms, these amazing massive rooms on mental health topics, and we still do them. I'm doing one actually later this month with Nidhi, who has actually built the largest mental health club on Clubhouse called Mental Health Matters. But I say all of that because what social audio reminded me was this idea of participatory content, right? Where you, as those that are listening and those that are creating the room, you're able to both shape the content and where it's going. And then it also reminded me the importance of equalizing the medium of content creation. Let me say that again. The importance of equalizing the medium of content creation. What I mean by that is, when we watch TV, right, it's the broadcasting TV and we're passive consumers. When we watch YouTube, yes, we can watch, but our ability to contribute is after the fact in the comment section, right? And we're able to do that in text. Live video, which, for those that don't know, live video is kind of where I kind of got my 15 minutes of fame, and on Periscope and Meerkat and Facebook Live, Instagram Live, LinkedIn Live, all of those live video platforms. I spent a lot of time on the live video platforms from 2014 to 2018. And I love those platforms, but I was delivering content via video, and people will be watching live and commenting via text. And so there's immediately like a hierarchy. There's like without us even realizing, there's I'm talking to you and you are communicating with me, but you're doing it on a different medium. What's beautiful about social audio, both Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces, is that it is equal, right? When someone raises their hand, they ask a question. Audio. They come on stage, their bubble is just the same as everyone else's bubble, and it's an audio to audio conversation, which really, in my opinion, makes people more relatable. It allows for more authentic and dynamic conversations, and it also shifts the need for us to feel like we have to always create, we could actually curate safe spaces, curate conversations, curate amazing panelists that were, part of the different rooms. And so social audio was amazing. And then the other part of it is because of the Clubhouse app, it added the thing that I believe has been missing the most from social media, which is serendipity. I believe serendipity, the idea that I scrolled that room on Clubhouse and I found that room titled Jack of all trades, masters of none, welcome. And I realized also that how would I have found others who identify with that, right? Like, what am I going to go find a hashtag on Instagram and follow a bunch of people? What am I going to do? Like search every Facebook group? How am I going to, where would I discover that content? Maybe like old school Yahoo forums or possibly on Reddit. Reddit might have been all of the place that might have happened. And so for me, this like serendipity really is like a beautiful thing in social audio. But on top of that, it also really allows those that are willing to really follow my two rules. I have two rules with my press the damn button mentality, and social audio, they're essential. And it's important for this conversation. And my first rule is that perfection is a fairy tale. Perfection is not the enemy of done. I hate that saying as well. I'm not a big fan of that one. I don't want to say hate. Hate's too strong. But if we say perfection's the enemy of done, we are still alluding to the idea that we should achieve perfection. And I believe what perfection, the desire to achieve or seek perfection, is a guarantee that you will never be satisfied. And let's face it, in this world right now, the idea that we are setting ourselves up to always feel as a failure is ridiculous because nobody is perfect. I mean, Mother Teresa would not have said that she was perfect. So who the hell are we to try to convey that we're perfect? And the beauty of that is we're seeing that across all social, right? Like Instagram used to be the filtered life, right? And everything had to have a filter and be perfection, right? And now we realize that was really just a myth and fake. And we're seeing people now being more vulnerable, talking about mental health and having these conversations. So that was my first rule of press the damn button, is that, you have to believe and embrace that perfection is a fairy tale. Now, rule number 2 of only 2 rules is that control is an illusion. You can only control yourself. You can't control what people do, what people say, how people show up, who shares, where things are going, what goes viral, what doesn't. And so if you can get over your need to be perfect and the fact that you can't control things, what it does is it allows you to use what I consider the most powerful phrase in any live content: live video, live audio, on stages, in person. This is the phrase. Hopefully everyone is ready. This is the phrase that I believe is essential for building trust, authenticity, and standing out for the noise. And the phrase is simply, I don't know. Yep, I know, mind-blowing. If you are comfortable enough to recognize that you are not perfect and that you cannot control every question and every variable, and someone asks you a question that you are not confident with the answer, your ability to admit that you don't know something is the magic that actually adds validity to what you do know. Right? We've all seen that, right? Like when we're listening to someone and they act like they know it all, and you're like, I don't trust anything that person says. But if someone says, you know what, I don't really know much about that topic, but let me get back to you or let me connect you with someone else. And then whenever someone asks another question, they're like, oh, that I know about. And they lean into it. What is the first thing? We're like, oh yeah, they must know this because they were admitting what they didn't know. And I would even argue that I think websites and brands should put like an I don't know page on their website, admitting what you don't know, because we know that you aren't perfect. We know that you can't solve all of the world's problems. And by owning that, it actually, I believe, increases the credibility factor versus those that are faking it till they make it, those that are lying and showing up. Now, with all that being said, I said in a past episode, there's a difference between transparency and oversharing. But there's also a difference between being vulnerable because it is part of the story and who we are. And then there's the idea of being vulnerable because you're being strategic in the emotional reaction that you're trying to get, right? And we've seen this a little bit recently on social where all of a sudden everyone has ADHD or everyone is going through depression. And the sad thing about that is there are so many people that we need to hear that from, but there are people that are using it as a marketing tactic or as a tactic to increase engagement. And I think that's a sad state, and I think unfortunately there's nothing we can really do about that. And I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I'm a very passionately optimistic and let's just say I am a positive person, and I like to believe in the good of all people. But without all that being said, now it comes down to, Clubhouse had launched and then Twitter Spaces rolled out. And I mean, I'm a massive Twitter fanboy, but I will say the thing that Twitter has always sucked at, and I have good friends that are executives. I mean, Kayvon, who's on the executive team over there, who was the founder of Periscope, is a friend. The thing that Twitter has sucked at was marketing their own solutions, right? Like they were not great at marketing like what a retweet was, why 220 characters versus old school 140 characters. They weren't good at, of marketing like their video content and how their algorithm works. Like I would argue their algorithm right now is only second to TikTok as far as a great algorithm for giving you the content that you want at the right time. But so Twitter rolled out Twitter Spaces, and they rolled it out beautifully, in my opinion. They were very transparent. They worked in public. They were doing a lot of these, and they still do them. They do a lot of these town hall calls where they talk about the feature set that they have coming out. They give people updates about what's going on in Twitter, and they do it really well with Twitter Spaces. And Twitter Spaces has grown on me because it's set up a little different than Clubhouse. I like to think of like Clubhouse feels more like a workshop event where people are coming for those that are on stage, but people can come up and ask questions and participate. Twitter feels more like you're sitting at a giant dinner table and people are just pulling up to the table and listening, and then they can raise their hand if they want and add to the conversation. And for me, it's a little bit to do with the layout. It's also a little bit to do with the fact that it's Twitter. The other thing, the big difference between Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces is that when someone opens the Clubhouse app, they're going there only for social audio. When someone jumps into a Twitter Spaces social audio room, maybe they were scrolling Twitter, maybe they were looking at a hashtag, maybe they were crafting a tweet, and all of a sudden they saw that space came up. Or maybe they put the Twitter, the social audio, the Twitter Space on their calendar, and they showed up just for social audio, right? There's more variables that are in play there. And so with all of that being said, the beauty of Twitter Spaces, especially for this NFT space, is that anyone can create a Twitter space. Anyone that has a Twitter account, I think all you need is like 50 followers, or you have to be following 50 people. They just don't want like bot accounts. But pretty much anyone can create a Twitter space. It's really beautiful. But the downside on why most Twitter spaces suck is, well, because anyone can create a Twitter space. And there is a difference between being a subject matter expert and being a great host. There's a difference between being a thought leader and being a facilitator of conversations. There's a difference between being a great keynote speaker and storyteller and someone that can really read the room and redirect the conversations. Now, I will say I take great pride in my ability to do this, because I've always believed that when you go to an event, panels, the structure of a panel, right? Like four subject matter experts and one moderator. I don't believe panels suck. I just believe that most moderators suck at moderating a panel. And in most cases, the events usually like, oh, the president of our company wants to moderate that panel. Oh, we're going to let, Sally from HQ, from HR moderate the panel just to give her some stage time. And I think that's a sad state, because if you want to do that role well, I call it the triangle of trust, which is a whole nother thing. But like the triangle of trust is the secret for actually being a great host. What I mean by that is you have to have the trust of those that you're on your panel, that you're going to make them look good. You have to have the trust of the audience that you're going to curate a great experience and that you understand their problems and what's going on in their world. And then the end of the triangle is that it's your job to make them look good and connect those dots, right? So that's that full triangle. Now, here's the thing. on Twitter Spaces, I do all of our interviews for the podcast on Twitter Spaces. I host a lot of Twitter Spaces. Actually, as soon as I'm done recording this, I'm doing a Twitter Space with the 90s Babes NFT project. We're talking mental health on Twitter Spaces. So I do a lot of social audio. But here's the thing that I want to help everyone is that I could do I could do multiple episodes on what it takes to create a great Twitter space as a host. But here's the thing. I actually think it's more important to know how to be a great Twitter space question asker, right? That's like my official, the person asking questions. How can you be someone that uses Twitter spaces to get on people's radar, to make an impact, to grow your following, and ultimately stand out with who you are, what your brand is, maybe even stand out with the collection, the NFTs that you own. And so I think that is a skill set that most people underestimate. And I will tell you, one of the most important aspects of this is you must listen more than you talk, right? Like the whole, we got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Now that's funny coming from me, right? Because all these podcast episodes are long. You guys, everyone who's listened to every single daily episode, I talk a lot. I came out of the womb talking. My mom's, very proud that I found a career that is keynote speaking and a podcaster that, it just allows me to do what the one, creative skill that I have, which is talking. But with that being said, the reason I say that listening is more important than what talking is, here's the magic for, when you're going to raise your hand to ask a question. Here's what I go through. And the funny part about this is I've closed a 6-figure influencer deal by using this one strategy to get on the radar of a company that I've been trying to get on the radar for years, and they were not paying attention to me, but they were hosting a room. And I was like, you know what? I got this. And just the context, the name of the company, is New Era Hats. And so their CMO, one of their CMO, I think from the Canada region, was on stage. And I remember reading the title of the room, and I was like, you know what? I want to listen to what the conversation's about. And so I listened to the host reset the room, talk about, why they brought this room together. I listened to a couple of the panelists who were talking about what the room was all about, why they were there and they were sharing their narrative. And then I listened to the gentleman from New Era Hat, whose radar I wanted to get on. And I was listening to him share, and I was like, man, he didn't give me enough information. So I clicked on his bio, I went over to his LinkedIn, and I went into his LinkedIn, and I started reading some of the comments that he made on other posts. And I was like, oh man, like he really cares about, the creator and the artists behind some of their most exciting, their hats that they've been putting out there. And I was reading this through the comments. And so here's the magic. What I did was I waited until, he had answered a question and it had gone around to others, but he hadn't gotten a question asked to him in a while. And I was like, okay, here's my chance. So I raised my hand on the app. I hit, raise my hand, and they pulled me up there. And this is where that magic comes, because if I was going to ask the question for myself, it was going to make it about me. If I was going to ask the question about just New Era Hat, oh, look, and Siri's talking to me on my watch, then it was going to be very siloed. But what I framed the question on was, what would the audience that I know why they're here for, what would they care about? And how can I ask the question in a way that demonstrates my knowledge and experience, but makes it about the greater audience, and then directing it towards the person that I want to answer the question. And the key to doing this, and it works in every Twitter space that I'm ever a part of, is you have to listen to what is the vibe and energy, what are the things that are being said, but we can't repeat the same questions. But we also have to recognize what are the things that those people are passionate about. What are what's the underlying, I will go through the profiles on Twitter Spaces and I'll click, okay, that there's an artist, oh, there's a creator, there's an inventor. Okay, there's a lot of artists in this room. Okay, when I ask my question, I'm going to ask a question that attracts, that is appealing to the artist community, because there's more artists in the actual Twitter space. Right? I'm not an artist myself, but I'm gonna actually shade that question a little bit so that it's appealable to them. Because here's the thing that happens is, if you ask a great question to the person, but it doesn't appeal to the audience, they're gonna say things like, and I say these, hey, that's a great question, but it's really not on topic. Why don't you send me a direct message? Which, let's face it, who knows where those direct messages go. Or if you ask a question that is very me driven, the answer for the most part is going to be short, because we all, for the most part, as thought leaders, as subject matter experts, respect people's time. And if it seems self-serving, it doesn't seem like it's worth elaborating on. And so with the New Era hat person that went up there, I set it up perfectly, right? I waited, I did my research, I asked the question, I said, I know for a lot of us here in the audience, that think of ourselves as fans and consumers and influencers, what are some of the things that we can do to get on our favorite brands' radars? Like, how can we not be annoying yet still get on the radar? Because, I'm a guy that loves hats, and I mean, New Era is up here on stage, and I would love to work with New Era, and I've been, tagging them for years, but I've never really got on their radar. Could you, as brands, give us a little idea of how we could be, get on the radar without being annoying? Well, you see what I did there was I didn't say I want the New Era person to answer it, right? Because that's always awkward. And I didn't say like, hey, I want to be a New Era influencer. What I did was I framed it as a we and all the things that we think about, right? These are the problems we have. And then I identified my connection to one person, but then I asked it to the broader group. And of course, what happened was the host was like, woohoo, that's a great question. I think let's send that over to the CMO of New Era. And then I know a couple other people are going to want to jump in. What happened? 5 seconds in, he's like, wait a second, like, you're the guy that wears hats on stages. Like, someone else had mentioned you. You know what? Send me a DM. I would love to, figure out a way to work together. Then they answered my question. And for me, it was so funny because when they sent me the DM, and this is maybe a little bit too much transparency, but they were like, wow, we just loved your question. And I was like in shock that we hadn't worked with you yet. I'm so glad that you raised your hand, because if you hadn't, I don't know if I would have realized that these two worlds were connected. Like, you're like, man, I'm just so glad Clubhouse existed. And for me, it was like, yeah, me too. I'm also glad that I knew what I was doing when I asked that question. And so I say all of that because in Twitter Spaces, this is what I hear way too often, is people will raise their hand, they'll wait to get asked their question, and they'll ask a very me question or a very individual question, or they won't ask a question that is broad enough for people to actually, provide value on. And part of that is you kind of have to always come with two questions when you raise your hand. One question that is like, man, this is the question I'm excited to ask. And then one question that you're like, you know what, if someone already asked that question or asked something similar, or if the person that I was hoping to answered the question in front of me and I don't want it to be all about that person because that's a little bit awkward, I have this second question for me in my back pocket. The other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing on Twitter Spaces or on Clubhouse and social audio is that you also want to recognize, the words that you're using and make sure that you're using words that are inclusive. And we all make this mistake. I make the mistake as well, where I'll say, hey, thanks guys so much for bringing me up on stage, and gals, right? Which is like, okay, hold on a second. That's not cool, right? Because I'm almost qualifying, right? We can say, thanks everyone for, bringing me up on stage. I'm excited to be here, making sure that we're using inclusive language. We also have to make sure that we, and this is coming from someone that loves to give TED Talks when I talk on stage, but you might notice when I ask questions, I don't ask questions that are very long-winded. The way that I do is I acknowledge the room. I set up the question with a little bit of context. I don't say, to give a little background about myself. I don't ever say that. But I'll say, with my, I worked for the government for 9 years in cybersecurity. And so for me, security is something that is important, but it's kind of my past life. And so here's the question I would love to set for you as the panelist. And, and I love that we have someone here representing from, whatever that company is. See how I set that question up, right? And I also tied in my background. And so I acknowledge, say, thanks everyone for letting me hear. Great room, loving these conversations. For me, as someone that worked in cybersecurity for 9 years, and now I'm setting it up, and then I ask the question, right? Now, the other part of this is that in some cases, you'll want to ask a question without giving all of the context up front, in the hopes that they ask you like, oh, you know what? I'm curious, what about this, scenario is most important to you, right? Because now they're creating a conversation or dialogue. To me, this is a great way to stand out. The other thing that I do is I use the emojis in Twitter Spaces to let the panelists know that I'm, of course, paying attention. I also, while I'm in there, I look at other people's bios and say, if they care about this same topic on Twitter Spaces that I do, more than likely, they're probably someone I should be following as well. I'm also not afraid to share it out. I tweeted this out earlier today, but I don't know. This is kind of breaking news for everyone that's listening. Right now, today, and I believe the next couple of days, probably into the future, it costs 0 ETH and actually no gas. 0 ETH and no gas to retweet somebody, to like a tweet, or to celebrate a Twitter space that you're in. Yep, it costs 0 ETH. And I know that's a little bit, I'm having a little fun here, but on Twitter, there's two things that I think people don't do enough of. First of all, they don't follow enough people. Nobody cares about the percentage of followers versus following. That's something that used to be talked about that's no longer talked about. Twitter's algorithm is going to organize things for you. And then I also think people don't do enough of quote retweeting and sharing something from someone else, but adding your own take, right? Because people are following you for not only the things you find value, but also your take on that topic or that value. So if you're going to share out a Twitter space, why not share it out and say, this is my favorite takeaway of this. This space is great talking about this, this, and this, and then tag the people that were on stage. Well, now you're demonstrating that you're paying attention, you're highlighting the things about the space that you like the most, and you're putting it on the radar of the people that are on stage. It costs 0 ETH, 0 money. It takes maybe 15 seconds to do, but you'd be amazed. I will say, and I will tell you that it kind of goes back into my bigger social media mantra, and it's simply show you care. I believe the bar for caring right now on social media is pretty low. And what I mean by caring is not like liking everything or retweeting everything or tagging people in every damn tweet. What I mean by that is when people are usually just, jumping and saying like, hey, Brian, I love that you have a podcast. Can I be on it? Right? They'll tweet me that. What if you went into my account, realized what my podcast is about, went into the podcast account, went to my website, and then drilled in and looked at all of the episodes and then tweeted me and said, Brian, I love your podcast. My favorite 3 episodes that you did are this, this, and this. Thanks so much for the content you're creating. If you're ever looking for a guest that's talking about this, let me know. Guess what I'm going to do with that? First of all, I'm going to be like, hey, they did their research. They took the time to care about me. Now I'm going to care about them and who they're about. Then I'm going to follow them. And then I'll be like, oh, I don't know if I have someone that's talking on that topic. Maybe I'll add them to my list. And so all I did there was care more than everyone else. The amount of people that send me a DM right now that say, I want to be on your podcast, or Brian, please talk about our project. And they're not even following me on Twitter or the podcast account. Guess what the chances of someone asking, a cold ask that isn't even following me on social? What's the chance of them getting on the podcast? A hard no, 0.0%. I know that sounds, and I'm not a jerk, but I'm just going to say, that's like a line for me. Like, don't ask me to care about you without caring about me, or at least valuing my time, or giving me a little bit of that social currency and following me on social. You'll notice if you tweet about this podcast, I follow every single person that tweets about the podcast, because if you took the time to listen to this podcast, there's a good chance you might be sharing something or talking about something that is also valuable for me to follow. I follow a lot of people on Twitter, but the algorithm does a great job of filtering those things down that makes it all worth it for me. The last part about Twitter Spaces or social audio is you also want to be very aware of your, how clear and how good your audio is. Now, for the most part, AirPods work pretty well. For those that listen to me on Twitter Spaces or on Clubhouse, I actually use my podcast microphone, the same one I use for the show. I just have a dongle plugged into my actual phone that allows me to use a professional microphone through my Rodecaster board. But if I'm not at my desk, I'll use my AirPods. And if I don't have my AirPods, I'll use speakerphones, as long as my kids aren't around or there's not dogs in the background or whatever it may be. And then the other part of this as well is you have to be respectful for the spaces. One of my secrets, and this is the one I'll kind of close with, one of my secrets is that if I go onto a space to raise my hand and ask a question, and I'm verified on Twitter, I have a fairly large following. So for a lot of times, people are going to bring me up no matter what. But they bring me up and I ask a question and they'll be like, oh, that's a great question. They'll answer the question. One of the things that I'll do, and you will see me do this, is if they didn't ask me to stick around, or if they weren't like, hey, Brian, like, that's a great question. I'd love to see if anyone else has any questions for you. I'll stay on stage for like 5 minutes or so, but then I'll actually hold down on my face and say, switch to listening. And I'll put myself back in the audience. And then I stay in the audience and listen, put on up emojis and support the show. Because here's the thing. There are a lot of people that do drive-by thought leadership. And I think of drive-by thought leadership just as bad almost as those that message me without even taking the time to follow. What I mean by that is they will only support or be in a room if they have the microphone. And right now on Twitter Spaces, there's a lot of people like that. They will come in the room, 3 seconds in the room, they raise their hand, they'll jump up, they're like, I have a question for you. They'll ask a question. If I push them back into the audience because I need the room, they'll immediately leave the room and jump into a different Twitter space. To me, that's pretty insulting. Now, if it happens once, hey, something came up. It happens twice, okay, hey, I'm going to keep an eye on that. It happens regularly, I'm not going to pull you up to ask questions. I'm not going to respect your time, right? Because I think, and it's just a little bit of like one of those things where we have to recognize that if we want that respect and we want value, that's the things we have to do. And I will tell you, people pull me up on stages that they don't pull up much bigger accounts on stages. And oftentimes they'll tell me, Brian, the reason why is we know that you respect the space, that you're there to support us. And if you don't have anything else to add, you'll move yourself to the audience so that others have a chance to speak. I mean, especially white men, of all of my listeners, the white men that are listening, we have to do a better job. And I say we because I'm included in this, of making space, of creating space, of giving up our own seat and our own microphone in some cases, so that so minorities and those that identify as women and non-binary have a chance to have their voices heard. You will notice a lot of times that if I'm brought on stage and there are other people that are on stage and people direct the first question to me, I will kindly ask, hey, would you mind the others answering first, and I'll gladly go last. That might be like, oh, Brian's trying to be a gentleman, or Brian's just trying just to act like he's, nice. But honestly, it's because I love to talk and I have a lot to say. But I also recognize that I have way more opportunities that have been given to me in my life. And I am very blessed with my white privilege to have had opportunities to use a mic in many other scenarios. And by me simply waiting my turn, maybe someone else says something that they wouldn't have been able to say because I already said it, right? And I hate that feeling. Now, the flip of that is I also hate dead silence, like as a radio DJ. So if it's like, okay, we're going to let anybody here on the panel answer. And if it's radio silence for too long, I will jump in because I don't like that silence. But I just want to put that out there that we do have to make sure that we pull other seats up to the table. And then lastly, I'll say, I don't do manels, which are panels that are all men. I don't speak at events that are not well supplied with a diversity of voices, a diversity of people, a diversity of race, diversity of sex that are on stages. I backed out of what was my dream event as a keynote for CES, one of the largest technology shows ever. And I backed out because there was only white men on the event. And when I made noise about that to the team, they added one minority male, and which was better than what it was before. But I was still massively insulted that there was no women that were on that panel, on the roster. And so I ended up pulling myself out. I didn't make a big deal out of it. I maybe only talked about it 3 or 4 times total ever. But for me, it's about what I'm associated with, about the world I want to create. And it's about, a lot of times it is optics. A lot of times it is, even if, I don't want to be a part of those things, by being a part of it and kind of putting my name there, I'm also signaling that apparently it's not so important that I'm willing to, pass up on the payday or lose out on that opportunity to speak. And unfortunately, that event team that was running that event that year, they didn't come back the next year, which was probably a good thing. But when I applied the following year to be a speaker, I didn't even make it to like the first round of auditions. So I don't know if I burn a bridge by standing up, but I have no regrets and I no qualms about that. So with that being said, I'm going to include in the notes, the show notes here, the blog post, which is new to NFTs, what you need to know about Twitter in 2022. It's a pretty long blog post, but I think that you'll get some massive value out of it. I talk about, leveraging hashtags, about, what you need to remember about, the difference between a hashtag and @sign. Talk about Twitter lists. I talk about some of the tools that I use to give me like a dashboard of all of the tweets. I talk about the difference between mobile and iPad and desktop Twitter, and also talk a little bit about social audio and some of the other things that I kind of mentioned here at a higher level. So, I think, Twitter is here to stay. There's no other platform in the world that allows us to kind of have that opportunity. But I will tell you, my mindset with Twitter, and this is where I will leave you, is that I always think of my tweets as a one-to-one conversation that is happening in public. Because what Twitter is an unfiltered fire hose of public conversations. And if you remember that and you recognize that not everyone's going to see every tweet, it's okay to repeat the same type of tweets on a regular basis because we're not seeing everything. But it's also about that conversation. Sometimes facilitating a conversation, sometimes driving a conversation, sometimes highlighting another conversation. But if you're able to embrace Twitter as that unfiltered fire hose of real-time conversations, and you're able to craft your tweets as one-to-one messages that are happening in public, you're gonna find value on the platform like I do. Twitter is the first app that I open in the morning and the last app I close at night. And for all those that are following on Twitter, that engage on Twitter, thank you for the time. Thank you for following, and I appreciate you. Lastly, this podcast is super powered by the ADHD coin at Rally. We actually hit an all-time high yesterday on Rally for our coin. Our coin just creased over the $12 mark, and which is pretty cool because I had hoped at some point this spring we would hit over the $10 mark, which we ended up doing the first week of January. And then just recently crossed over that $12 mark. So exciting times ahead. It's not really just about the dollars of the coin, right? It's the utility, the NFTs that we have supporting the podcast. And really, I thank everyone who's holding it, right? The more people that are holding the coin, the more value that the coin has and goes up for all of us. So it is a perfect example of we are greater than me. So if you want to check out the coin, just go to adhdcoin.com in any of your browsers and it'll redirect you to Rally. Until tomorrow, my friends, make a good one. Cheers. All right. Thanks so much those who are watching on video. Talked a lot about Twitter. Talked about the Twitter, this blog post that I have. I'll throw that blog post up. Let's see, I'll throw this up here on the screen. So yeah, there's the blog post. It is definitely a long blog post for those to read on Twitter, but I try to give some really concrete examples and things that I think are valuable for everyone to consume. So you can check that out. I'll put that in the notes below. And as always, thanks for subscribing. Thanks for commenting here on the video. We're really dialing in the video content. We're spending a lot more time here on SEOing it, trying to get it in front of more audiences. So if you don't mind sharing out the video, where if you're watching it on Instagram, watching it on LinkedIn, watching it on YouTube, whatever it may be, sharing out the video, even beyond the podcast, would be of great value to us. So thanks so much, and make it a good one. Cheers. You like how I talked about new era hats, and I tried to find like the brightest, craziest hat. A lot of people don't like this hat. I love it. Kind of fits my personality. Cheers.